Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning. If you're joining us from different parts of the world, my name is Sharang Taimade and I represent Seed Global Education. And we've got a wonderful next 1 hour coming up where um, you wonderful participants gets to learn a little more about climate change and what are we doing about it, but also about the GW Elliott School of International Affairs, which is located and I know there is going to be a presentation about this very soon, but this is located right in Washington, D.C., a few blocks away from the White House, which is going to have a lot of activity coming next month or early next year onwards as well. We will talk a lot about just studying in the US, studying international affairs, studying global communications. For all of you that are interested to pursue a master's program very soon. But we also have this really interesting masterclass. When I saw this topic, I knew that this is going to be really well attended, and it also showcases that very soon. What I'm going to do very quickly is I'm going to introduce you to the wonderful people that are here. First and foremost, I'm going to introduce you to to this insightful session, which is how do we change what's possible, global efforts to combat climate change, and what are some of the innovative solutions and collective actions that we could all take for a sustainable future. This masterclass is going to be presented by Dr. Nina Kelsey. She's the Associate Professor of Public Policy and International Affairs. She's also the Director of the International Science and Technology uh, Policy MA program at the GW Elliott School of International Affairs. She's been in this role for quite some time. Her research examines the role of interest in environment policy making and negotiation. And in particular, she focuses on how changes to interest can occur over time, especially via feedback, and how these changes shape environmental policy making these environment policy making at international, national, and subnational levels as well. A lot of that is what we're going to discuss in this masterclass later today. And we also have um, our colleague from the GW Elliott School of International Affairs, that's Danielle Goldstein. She's been there since 2019, where she's completed programs in education and human development and specializing in higher education administration. Basically, she's the boss. If you'd like to study at the Elliott School of International Affairs, you need to have her in your good books. So that's something. Short introduction about myself. I represent Seed Global Education. We help participants like you, candidates like you, make more informed choices. We bring you these master classes because where you get to hear directly from professors. So this is kind of like a taste of what your future would look like if you take a flight across the pond, across a couple of ponds, since most of you are from India. But we would like to hear from you. And before I move on to Dr. Kelsey and to Danielle, I would first like to hear which cities you are joining us from. So use the chat. We'd like to have some bit of interaction here. We still have a couple of minutes before we go live. There are 150 of us in this room already. So thank you so much. If your friends are coming in, please let them know that they should join very soon. Please let us know which city you're joining in from. So we've folks from Bangalore, New Delhi, Mumbai. Barbara is here from Accra, Ghana. Welcome. Ayush from Kolkata. Shirin is joining us from Berlin. Welcome. Delhi, Kolkata, Pune. We're looking at the length and breadth of the country. Mumbai, Delhi, Noida, which is also very close to Delhi. So a lot of folks here from some of the top cities. I think there's Divya here from Malaysia. A lot of people, there's folks from Jordan, but Prague, Ladakh, Kolkata, Delhi. So we're talking literally, Daniel, Professor Kaltri, from literally the extreme north of the country, which is Ladakh, to I saw Kerala somewhere, which is in the extreme south. So yes, we have folks from different parts of the country. Some of our friends here from Ghana and Nigeria as well. So we welcome you to this wonderful session as well. I know you guys are not here to hear from me, you're here to hear from Professor Kelsey and from Daniel. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Professor Kelsey to talk to us about this wonderful topic that we have in place, which is how do we change what's possible, global efforts to combat climate change, and we look forward to hearing some innovative solutions and collective actions for a sustainable future.
Well, thank you so much for that introduction. I hope I can even begin to live up to it. But let's get started. Let me get this sharing started. Okay, and hopefully everyone can see and hear me fine now.
Yes, we can.
Excellent. All right, so let's get started. I did want to say just hello and thank you so much for being here. It's a real honor to get to talk to people from so many places around India as well as around the rest of the world, as I see from the chat. I am Nina Kelsey. I'm going to speed through this because that was such a great introduction. But I, excuse me, apparently can't talk this morning. I am the program director of the MA in International Science and Technology Policy, and my specialty is in energy and climate policy. And I did just throw my email up there in case anyone wants to contact me after this. So I want to start out by talking not about climate, but about something that happened in the last couple of years over in the ozone negotiation sphere, which was the Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol controlling ozone depleting substances. And in particular, the fact that it was ratified by the US Senate in September of 2022. Now, I'm not sure how closely folks around the world follow internal US climate policy and our, our particular partisan situation, but for the US Senate to ratify on a bipartisan basis an environmental treaty is it's an unusual event. And so we did this, in fact, via the AIM Act, the American Innovation and Manufacturing Act. That was the piece of legislation that ratified the treaty. And that was co-sponsored by a Democratic senator from Delaware and a Republican senator from Louisiana, which is one of our more conservative states. That would be Senator Kennedy, and one of our relatively liberal states, that would be Senator Carper. So the reason I want to talk about this is that efforts to reduce ozone depleting substances have been the single most successful international environmental treaty making efforts that we have seen in terms of the extent to which they have addressed and solved the actual problem that we're looking at. And you saw that at the time that they were sort of primarily put in place from 1985 to 1992, but you've also seen that right up to the present moment. And so I'm going to talk about that for a little bit, and then I'm going to talk about climate and sort of what we can learn from this for climate. So just because I know this is becoming a solved issue that isn't top of mind for people nowadays, ozone depletion is the depletion of the layer of ozone, a gas in the stratospheric atmosphere. And that gas is important to us because although ozone is a pollutant when it's down at the street or city level, it's very important in the stratosphere because it blocks UV. And so if we lose ozone in the stratosphere, then we end up with more UV radiation getting to Earth, and that causes a variety of ecosystem and human problems, things like skin cancers and so forth. So that is something we wanted to avoid. And ozone depletion is caused by a variety of chemicals, the most famous of which are chlorofluorocarbons, or CFCs, but which we will collectively also just refer to as ozone depleting substances, or ODSs. And so the chemicals that were implicated in this, in the ozone depletion problem, are several different ones. And I'm going to talk both about some chemicals that were the problems and also some chemicals that were various kinds of solutions. And so I've tried to produce some coding for this, some color coding, and also I use different fonts for those that maybe have color blind issues. So I hope this is a little bit followable. But in essence, the sort of OGs, the original problem chemicals, were CFCs, as I said, chlorofluorocarbons. And those are strong ozone layer depleters. Now, we also have the hydrochlorofluorocarbons, the HCFCs. Those are a different but related class of chemical that depletes the ozone layer, but they don't do it nearly as badly as CFCs. So initially, they were seen as sort of a stopgap because they were also relatively well-known chemistry. They weren't that expensive to produce, and so it's kind of the natural gas of the ozone problem, right? The thing that's better but not perfect in relationship to the problem. HFCs were the other class of chemicals that in the late 1980s and early 1990s, we were thinking about transitioning to, and indeed largely did transition to. Those are hydrofluorocarbons, and they don't deplete the ozone layer at all, but they do cause global warming. And so in the very most recent round, what we've seen is the attempt to replace HFCs with HFOs, which don't deplete the ozone layer and also don't cause global warming. And because HFCs are actually a very potent greenhouse gas, although the amounts of any of these chemicals that we emit are relatively small, they actually have an outsized impact on the climate. And so that Kigali Amendment that I mentioned, the purpose of that was to phase out those HFCs, which had been great from an ozone depleting perspective, but weren't great for climate change, and replace them with things like HFOs that don't deplete the ozone layer and also don't cause global warming. And so I want to just go through why I think that was relatively easy to do and relatively successful at the time and in the situation that we were in at that time, how climate is different, and what we can learn from it, though, that will help us out with climate. So there are a number of key players in the ozone negotiations, which again took place from around 1985 to around 1992, and then ongoing to the present, but that sort of 85 to 92 period was kind of the core period of negotiation. And I'm condensing this. The key players were larger than just the US, UK, and France, but in practice, as the US, UK, and France agreed to go, so went the negotiations, because those were the three largest producers of ozone depleting substances at the time. And so what you see is in 1985, they gathered together all the countries of the world, and the countries of the world agree to continue talking. So in 1985, they create the convention framework that will allow for these negotiations. But they're not able to agree on any regulation to control ozone depleting substances at all. As of 1987, 2 years later, we come back, and what we see amongst these three key players, sort of with coalitions aligned around them, is the USA has gone in for just getting rid of CFCs. So let's stop the ozone depleting problem. Let's get rid of CFCs. The UK and France both want to keep CFCs. They're not yet convinced. And by the way, I see my cat has just jumped up behind me. You're probably going to see them again because I'm working from my home office, and they love to make their presences known when I'm on a call. Otherwise, they ignore me, but when I'm on a call, there they are. Okay. So originally we have a sort of the US and some allied countries versus the UK and France and some allied countries. And what they are able to hammer out is a sort of partial measure. So they're able to agree to reduce ozone depleting substances, particularly CFCs, by about 50%. And then they go away and they come back 2 years later for another round of negotiation in 1990. And by that time, the UK has switched its position. So now the USA wants to lose CFCs and the UK wants to lose CFCs, but France is still resistant. France is not so sure about this. And then they make some more regulation. They actually ramp up the stringency of regulation substantially, but not completely, right? We're looking at more like a 90% phase out of the things we care about. So then in 1992, we come back again, and this time it's not just CFCs we're talking about, it's HCFCs, those partial substitutes that have some ozone depleting capacity, but not nearly as bad as CFCs. And now we're seeing some interesting bifurcation in how these countries are looking at this. So now we have a situation in which the USA still wants to lose CFCs, but it wants to keep HCFCs. And meanwhile, the UK has gone all the way. They want to lose CFCs and they also want to lose HCFCs, get rid of both of them. And France is kind of in the same camp as the US now. It's okay with losing CFCs, it's made that conversion, but it does also want to keep HCFCs. And I want to talk about why that change happens, because to me, that's kind of the core issue of international environmental negotiation is how do we create a situation in which countries can get to the point of changing what they see in their best interests? Like, how do we make a situation in which a country can go from thinking, this is not good for me, I don't want to regulate this pollutant, to, yes, we do want to regulate this pollutant, let's do it. And I want to jump in here by talking about the company strategy in each of these sort of core producers of these pollutants, ozone depleting substances. We can boil this down to three companies almost entirely, because each of these countries hosted one really big company. The USA also had a couple of smaller companies, but they kind of followed along with DuPont. So the USA hosted DuPont, the UK hosted ICI, and France hosted Adochem. And in response to that first round of partial regulation in 1987, they started building factories, because now that the regulation was coming down the pipe, they were like, okay, we'd better do something about this. We're going to need to produce some pollutant substitutes so that we continue to be able to sell chemicals that do these jobs. And they were largely, by the way, I should have said refrigerants, so they keep things cool. And they also have some other applications in semiconductor manufacturing and in things like blowing foams, styrofoam, that kind of thing. Okay, so in the US, DuPont invested in both full and partial substitutes. So they started building factories for both those HFCs, the ones that have no ozone depleting potential, and the HCFCs, the ones that are kind of partial substitutes, those natural gas of ozone. In UK, ICI invests entirely in those full substitutes, HFCs. And in France, Adochem continues to make CFCs, is not phasing those out just yet, but is also investing in HCFCs, those partial substitutes. So they, as I said, in 1987, they have they're responding to the actual Montreal Protocol. In 1990, the countries come back, and you can see that the way that their national positions changed keeps track with what their companies were doing. So the USA has always wanted to lose CFCs. Its companies are building CFC substitute factories. That's fine. The UK has gone from wanting to keep CFCs to wanting to lose CFCs, because its company, ICI, is investing in substitutes, has those factories. And France still wants to keep CFCs because it really has not stopped that investment. In fact, after 1987 and before 1990, it actually bought up one of the factories in the United States that the US's companies were selling off that made CFCs. Okay, so like I say, in 1990, we get this second round of negotiation, things are tightened up. And once again, the companies in these countries respond. So in the USA, again, continuing to invest in HFC manufacturing capacity and HCFC manufacturing capacity. In the UK, continuing to invest in HFC manufacturing capacity. And in France, we finally see that they really are starting to start to shed CFC manufacturing capacity. And they're going in bigger on these HCFCs, and they're starting to make some small investments in manufacturing capacity for HFCs, so large pilot facility type stuff. So basically what I argue here is that the ozone negotiations and the rounds of regulation that came out of them triggered a positive feedback loop that I call a green spiral. Each round of regulation caused the companies that were really important to creating the national positions on what countries thought was good for them and their economies and their businesses. Those companies were making changes, incremental changes, in response to each round of regulation. But those incremental changes, that building of new capacity for substitutes, caused those companies to change what they saw as their interests. And that caused them to be talking to the national government saying, okay, actually regulation might be okay, or even might be good, because once they built those factories, they wanted those factories to be working at full capacity. And so because they built a bunch of capacity really quickly, and also people were finding other solutions to ozone depleting substances, the market wasn't immediately as big as they thought it would be. And so by 1990 to 1992, you're actually seeing these companies, particularly in the US and the UK, start calling for more regulation. So between 1985 and 1990, they go from no, no, no to yes, please, more. So I started out talking about something that happened in 2022, that Kigali Amendment. Um, and why did a Republican senator from Louisiana, a party and a state that typically are very strongly against the US ratifying international environmental treaties, why did this guy co-sponsor a bill? Well, the reason was because that bill was this latest step in the process where we're trying to move from things like HFCs, those full substitutes that are global warming chemicals, to things like HFOs, those full substitutes that are not global warming chemicals. And a big producer of these chemicals nowadays is a company called Honeywell, and they have built a big HFO manufacturing plant in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. So in this case, there's this interesting industrial interest that has been created that is pushing for an environmental regulation, even coming out of a state and a culture that would normally not be very regulation friendly. And part of the reason that this happened is because the manufacturers of ozone depleting substances were what I call convertible industries, which is to say they were making pollutants originally, but they could relatively easily change to making non-polluting substances. The chemistry was a different set of chemicals, but the general chemistry and their things that they were good at made it relatively easy to transition from one to the other. It was just a case of getting them to build those plants. And once they built those plants, their interests actually changed relatively quickly. So what does all of this mean for climate? And here I wanted to just, I don't know, I found this picture and I kind of love it. It's such a dramatic picture. This is the India 1 solar thermal power plant being built in Rajasthan, India. All right, so in climate, do we have opportunities like those ozone depleting substances manufacturing companies that became non-pollutant manufacturing companies? And the answer is yes. I do think there are industries in climate that could, and maybe even are, undergoing that same kind of transformation where they can build either polluting or non-polluting products. And it's a question of getting them to change the capacity, the manufacturing capacity that they have, change what those sunk cost assets that they want to defend are. One obvious industry is vehicles. Generally speaking, although we have certainly seen the rise of some new companies, it is also the case that legacy automobile manufacturers, your Hondas, your Toyotas, your Fords, your, what have you, those, your Hyundai, those companies can make both polluting internal combustion engine cars and also electric vehicles. So they can convert. And we are seeing them build factories to make these new, less polluting products. Another one is electric utilities. Electric utilities sell electricity. They don't really care where that electricity comes from, as long as they can generate it reasonably reliably, and they are allowed to charge a price for it that makes money back for them. So they don't want to be forced to lose money, but as long as they're not losing money, they don't really care what their electrical power is coming from. And so again, if you can get them to go from investing in things like coal-fired power plants to having sunk cost assets that are around renewable energy, all they want is to be able to continue to produce electricity from those existing assets and have that protected. So I think if you think about industries like this, there is potential for the same kind of virtuous cycle where early regulations cause companies to do things that actually change their interests over time and cause them to become less resistant to regulation and maybe even, in some cases, pro-regulation, which then in turn makes it much easier for their national governments to become more pro-regulation, pro-mitigation, pro-climate control in the international negotiations. Just checking the time. Okay, so we're nearly done here. And I think this raises some interesting questions, though, right? Because it's clearly, if we look around the world, we do see in every environmental negotiation, including climate, that some companies, some people, some governments choose to combat climate change early on, while others don't. Others maybe are laggards. They take a while to catch up. Here in the US, we know nothing about that, obviously. Um, so that's one question, who starts this process and why? How do we most effectively change what powerful interests want, undergoing this virtuous cycle of feedback? How do these dynamics change as the international context changes? I just told you a story that was very US, UK, France, Europe focused, but that's obviously not the world we live in today as we're approaching climate negotiations. And then I just think it's worth thinking about sort of what are the philosophical or ethical implications of focusing policy on changing industrial interests. That's not something I'm going to talk about at this moment because it's a big philosophical question, though I'm happy to take questions. But I think it's just worth raising as an issue. So who chooses mitigation? I think this comes down to a combination of the starting conditions, the perceived opportunities, and leadership and persuasion. So some companies or countries are just better set up to go down an evolutionary pathway like this. So in the United States, in ozone, it so happened that DuPont Chemical already had started to get rid of CFCs, and so that was part of their starting conditions. And they perceived opportunities. They were ahead of the ball, they thought, in making these substitutes, and they thought maybe they could regain market share if they were ahead of the game on those, and other companies in other countries that they were competing with were a little bit behindhand. There was also leadership, political leadership, company leadership. It does matter if individual political leaders or company leaders believe in this thing and feel like they want to push a little faster. And it does also matter if we're out there kind of trying to persuade each other to do a little bit more, nudge each other along. That's the sort of purpose of international negotiation. How do we most effectively change interests, though, in something like climate change? So I alluded to this idea of convertible industries. It is also obviously the case that not every industry is as easily convertible. So, for instance, a company that makes its money extracting oil and gas from the ground is not a company that is readily, it doesn't have the right capacities and know-how to easily start making, say, solar panels. Those are just very different products, and it's really kind of starting from the ground floor if it wants to get into something like solar panels. So this is a much harder conversion prospect. And so I think we can think consciously about this. We can decide that our early rounds of regulation should target those industries and interest groups that are most easily convertible, that we can bring over into the pro-regulatory coalition as quickly as possible. And I think we also need to think about the mix of policy types we use, because in something like climate, there's been a lot of talk around something like carbon pricing, right? Putting a tax on carbon emissions or creating a cap and trade program that effectively prices carbon. And I think those policies can be great. There are a lot of economic advantages to them. They are relatively pervasive. They're kind of automatic. You can let industry figure out the easiest ways to control carbon at any given moment as technology evolves. But it's also really hard to put in place really strong carbon pricing. And so what you tend to see is, in response to carbon pricing, interests tweak around the edges. They don't make big fundamental changes. Regulation, on the other hand, things like mandates or big incentives for a change, that tends to be what gets companies building big new factories. And so I think you really need to have a mix of these types of policies. You need the regulation and the incentives to get that big initial push to start to change interests, but you need carbon pricing to kind of clean up around the edges, make sure that nothing gets neglected, make sure that industry finds as many ways to reduce carbon as it can. And then finally, thinking about this internationally, like I said, it's a very different world from 1992 now. The key players in climate are not France, the UK, and the US. So it's worth thinking about how, what do we see here in terms of different profiles of countries that are involved? So we might think about things like fossil fuel rich countries versus fossil fuel poor countries. Obviously, it's easier to transition a fossil fuel poor country to being in the pro-regulatory coalition because it just doesn't have as many of those strong industry interests, oil and gas majors, for instance, that you need to kind of figure out how to work around. National emission source profiles matter. It's one thing if you're a country with a already a relatively low carbon economy because you're more services focused. It's another thing if you're a country with industries that are very high carbon, that do heavy manufacturing, steel, um, producing oil and gas, obviously, but also anything that takes a lot of power to manufacture. And of course, there are some countries that have a mix of both. And then finally, developmental stage and path dependency matters. And here I think is actually where you see one of the biggest differences, because the US, UK, France, those types of countries, their infrastructure, their sunk cost assets are very set. They already have a lot of big industries. They already know what they're good at. And so you can look for the convertible industries, but sometimes you also just need to grow interest from the ground up, right? You need to create those solar companies. You need to create those wind companies. And that might be harder to do in a country that already has a bunch of well-developed companies. It might be a little easier to do if you're in a developing or transitioning economy where you're still sort of sorting out what you're going to be best at. You're still building new industries, et cetera. You can just sort of focus on building pro or regulatory adapted industries right from the start. And a great example of this is in China, where we have seen as China sort of approaches the automobile manufacturing market, it's a big market, they'd love to get into it, but they have decided that electric vehicles are kind of the wave of the future and also are a much less set market. There's a lot fewer direct competitors out there in the international sphere, particularly direct competitors that are making reasonably priced cars, so like not the Teslas of the world. And so that was an early big focus for them, and they have become the world's largest manufacturer of electric vehicles. And so that was just an easier pathway for them. So that is basically what I have to say. I'm going to stop the presentation here right now and turn it all back to you folks.
Thank you so much, Professor Kesley. That was super insightful. We already have a ton of questions for that. We would request you to hang back for a few more minutes because I'd like to invite Danielle, who's going to talk to us a little bit about the GW Elliott School of International Affairs and how some of the students could certainly benefit for this as well. Just before I do that, reminder to all like the participants, including Yuki Chaudhary, to ask the questions in the Q&A tab. It'll be easier for us to review those questions and ask the relevant ones to either Professor Kelty or to Danielle herself as well. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Danielle, for taking out time to do this. Over to you.
Wonderful. All right. It's getting my page loaded. Okay, great. All right, so hello everyone. My name is Danielle Goldstein. I'm the Associate Director of Graduate Admissions at the Elliott School of International Affairs. If you enjoyed Dr. Kelsey's session and you can see yourself taking a class with her as an Elliott School graduate student, I'm really excited to provide you with some more information about our school and how you can become a student here. So I'll start off by talking about the options you have in terms of the programs that we offer. So the Elliott School offers 8 Master of Arts programs. We have 2 specialized master's degrees and 2 joint degree options. And starting next year, we're actually going to be offering a new STEM designated MS in International Economic Policy, which is really exciting. All of our programs are interdisciplinary and they cover a wide range of topics. Each program offers anywhere between 4 and over 15 concentrations that students can choose from. Some programs allow students to choose multiple concentrations or even create their own based on their specific interests. So you have a ton of flexibility to customize your program around what those interests are for you. Here are some of the strongest features of our school that you'll find across all of our programs. And all of these things contribute to the value that you get with your Elliott School degree. One of the biggest keys to our entire student experience framework is the flexibility that's built into your degree program. We offer both a fall and a spring start, which means you can start your program whenever the timing is right for you. Next, I'll talk about why all of our courses are held in the evenings. So our programs were built with students' best professional interests in mind. We want to allow students to take advantage of our unique location. Since all of our courses start at 5 p.m. or later, students have the opportunity to work or hold an internship or volunteer during the day before coming to campus in the evening really easily. The capstone experience will probably be one of the most memorable and impactful parts of all of your studies because of how it brings together everything you've learned and applies it in a hands-on, real-world scenario. So your capstone is typically completed over 2 consecutive semesters. You'll sign up for a class based on a thematic topic. That might be something like foreign policy or international security. You'll form small groups of 3 or 4 other students and formulate a research proposal. And then you'll work with an actual outside client to determine deliverables. The skills that you develop during this process and by completing your final research paper and presentation prepare you for employment immediately after graduation. And lastly, another favorite element that all of our programs share is our skills courses. These courses are built around feedback that our Graduate Student Services Office receives from surveys sent to domestic and international employers. So these courses allow students to stay up to date on the skills that employers are looking for in competitive candidates for the careers and internships that they offer. The Elliott School is in a unique location, and I don't just mean that we're in Washington, D.C. As we were saying a little bit earlier, we are located across the street from the State Department. We're about 2.5 blocks away from the White House. If you keep walking past the White House, you'll find the USAID headquarters. Students who have internships at the World Bank or the IMF can make it to class in about 5 minutes. They're just a couple blocks away from us in the opposite direction. So a lot of schools point out their DC location, but the Elliott School is truly positioned perfectly among the landmark centers for international affairs. And that has a huge impact on the kinds of speakers, events, and access the Elliott School and our world-renowned faculty can connect you with as a student and as an alum. All right, so as you've probably already discovered, a graduate education of the caliber you'll get at the Elliott School is a significant investment. So I'm sure you have questions about fellowship opportunities and other ways to reduce your tuition expenses. Here you can see the deadlines by which you'll need to submit your application in order to be considered for Elliott School fellowships. If you're applying for our fall term, which starts in August, you'll want to submit your application by January 7th. If you're applying for the spring semester, which starts in January, you'll want to submit your application by October 1st. All you need to do is submit your application and all of your materials by these deadlines, and then just indicate on your application that you want to be considered for fellowships. There's a question that will ask you that, and that will automatically consider you. So you don't have to submit any additional application to be considered for Elliott School fellowships. Now, keep in mind that we offer partial tuition scholarships at the Elliott School. Typically, they range between $2,000 and $10,000 USD per semester. So because our Elliott School fellowships only cover part of tuition, we strongly encourage you to look for additional fellowship opportunities. One place to look for those is housed centrally within GW. It's called the Office of Graduate Student Assistantships and Fellowships. They do offer additional fellowship opportunities. Now, unlike the Elliott School fellowships, these will require separate applications and have different deadlines. So as you're exploring those options, make sure you take a note of that. You'll also find scholarships and resources outside of GW. You might be familiar with some prominent fellowship opportunities such as Fulbright, things like that, but there are tons of other opportunities out there that are worth looking into. One really great resource that we recommend looking into scholarships in the field of international affairs specifically is called APSIA. This is the Association of Professional Schools of International Affairs. Their website offers an extensive directory of opportunities where you can filter by citizenship and other things that might or might not be applicable to you. Their website's also a really great resource for looking into graduate programs in general, so make sure you check them out. And then finally, we do our absolute best to provide a wide variety of all of these different graduate school funding options on our website. So be sure you review all of these resources available to you as early as possible. Make sure that you have a broad understanding of the various ways that you might reduce the cost of your education. Now, quickly before I wrap up, I want to go over our application prerequisites and required materials. The first thing to note is that some of our programs have 1 or 2 prerequisites and some have none at all. So the prerequisites that some of our programs have are either foreign language or economics or both. More information about what fulfill those prerequisites and which programs have them can all be found on our website. You will need to fill out our online application. The application fee is going to be waived for all of you who are attending this info session. So once you get to the end of your application, there will be an option to request a fee waiver. And you can just mention that you attended this masterclass today, December 12th, and it'll take us a couple of business days to approve your fee waiver. You need to submit a resume or CV and a statement of purpose. There are 2 prompts to choose from for your statement of purpose, which can be found on our website. We require 2 letters of recommendation, and generally we ask that you submit 1 academic reference and 1 professional reference. We require transcripts from all institutions that you've attended, as well as translations of those transcripts if they're not in English. Your bachelor's degree has to be equivalent to a US 4-year bachelor's degree. We typically evaluate transcripts in-house, but if you are, or if we are unable to determine that your degree is equivalent to a US 4-year bachelor's degree, you might be required to provide a course-by-course credential evaluation from a company such as WES. In terms of GPA, we don't have a minimum GPA required for admission. We review applications holistically, so we don't have any sort of minimum cutoff. But just to give you an idea, our average GPA for incoming students last year was about a 3.6 on a 4.0 scale. So that's just the average, but just to give you a sense. In terms of standardized test scores, most of our programs are test blind, which means that we don't even accept GRE scores. We do have 2 programs that are test optional, which means that they're not required, but you can submit test scores if you would like. But none of our programs require you to submit GRE test scores. And finally, English language test scores are required from international students, and we accept TOEFL, IELTS, PTE, and Duolingo. Here you can see those minimum score requirements for the English language tests that we accept. Again, you can find all of this info on our website, but just to give you a quick snapshot of that here. All right, so I think that we'll have some time for questions, but just in case you don't get your questions answered today, or if you think of any in the days ahead, I know this is a lot of information we're giving you, please feel free to email us at our email address listed here on the screen. It's bsiagrad@gw.edu. We also invite you to attend a virtual information session where we go a lot more in depth about our programs, the opportunities and support available to our students here, and much more that the Elliott School has to offer. You know, we only had a few minutes today, but we'll go a lot more into detail in that in our info sessions. We typically host a few virtual sessions each month. So you can sign up for those through this QR code or that link on our website. So thank you all so much.
Thank you so much, Danielle. Let me quickly add myself and actually to spotlight as well. Wonderful. That was super insightful. I want to pack my bags and come to DC and try and study at a school that is a few blocks away from the White House, few blocks away from so many wonderful places that we all see on TV, read on the internet, and actually studying there would surely be a wonderful experience. Hearing from all my friends at GW, it certainly is. We do have some questions, and this is a request to all the 267 odd people that are here, that this is the best time for you to ask questions. This could be GW Elliott specific, or this could be for Professor Kesley around her masterclass. We have the best part of 15 minutes that we'd like to get any of these questions. Please don't use the chat. Please use the Q&A tab. That shall certainly be helpful. My first question, and we have seen this word come up in the Q&A tab. I'd like to first ask this to Danielle and then to Professor Kesley. Is in the next couple of months, there's going to be a new sheriff in town, if you'd like to call it that way. What do you think is the impact, one to you, Danielle, on international students' mobility to the United States of America, and how is that going to be from a GW perspective? And to you, Professor Kesley, there are questions around India and US relations. I know this is a climate change topic, so there was a question around climate change as well between US relations, but just want to pick your brains about what are some of the India and US relations come the next couple of months. But we'll first talk to Danielle to learn a little more about the international student mobility.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I want to first say that I completely understand any sort of anxieties that students might be having around those questions. I think that's completely valid, and I definitely understand where that's coming from. I can't see into the future, so I can't say for sure what will or will not happen in terms of policy or even just kind of attitudes around students being able to come here to study in the US. What I can say is that at GW, we always have and will continue to value our international students and provide for them the best possible experience that we can, do our best to get them here and support them while they are here, and really do whatever we can throughout that process to support our international students. So we will definitely continue to do that. We have some experience here in President Trump's last term in office. We did have some situations come up where there were questions about students being able to come back into the country, especially if they had already been here and had left to go back to their home country during a school break or something like that. And I honestly don't think that it ended up actually preventing any of our students from actually coming back into campus. So there definitely were those kind of question marks in the air and those anxieties and some work that we had to do to make it happen. But I think in the end, we were able to get our students here. So yeah, all I can kind of say is that we will always continue to support you all. We want you all to come here, and we will do our best to have you be able to come and have it be a safe environment for you when you get here.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that, Danielle. Professor Kelsey, what do you think of India and US relations in the next couple of years to come, rather?
So I think that subdivides into two categories, sort of, right? So what the sort of general implications for US-India relations, and what's the implications for US-India relations in the climate sphere, and I think also kind of US world relations in the climate sphere. For the first hand, I'm going to echo what Danielle said. We don't always know exactly what to expect from any new president incoming, and I think that's certainly maybe especially true of President Trump, who is sort of known for making rapid changes on things sometimes, and very much going with his gut on things. But I don't think it's necessarily bad for India. One thing that's really interesting about the India-US relationship is that it sort of, it exists in the shadow of the US-China relationship. And so to some extent, I think the US, no matter who is in office, has seen China as a very valuable ally when it comes to sort of making sure that there's a global coalition that supports, counterbalancing some of the influence that China can sometimes have. So I don't expect that to change under our President Trump. It didn't in the past, and I don't see why it would this time around. And certainly in the next couple of years, if we're talking about relationships between President Trump and President Modi, they have generally been warm in the past. So again, I don't see any specific reason to expect that to change. Now, in terms of US, India, and US world relations in climate, obviously, President Trump of the past has not been friendly to international environmental negotiation around climate. Although I note that even to the extent that he withdrew us from the Paris Agreement, that didn't actually influence the US being at the negotiations. We still came to the table, we still negotiated. The other thing I really like to emphasize when I talk about this topic is how much of US climate and energy policy is not made at the federal level. So as somebody who favors climate and environmental and energy policy, who favors keeping our global temperature as low as we can. I always want to see the federal government at the US doing as much as it can. But that having been said, um, when a President Obama or a President Biden goes to the international negotiations in climate change and they make our nationally determined contribution pledge, that actually is much less reliant on federal action than you might think. A lot of it comes from sort of totaling up what US states like, say, California or New York or even Texas, which has a huge wind industry, are already doing. And that is unlikely to change substantially in a Trump presidency. I also will note, I did see in chat that there was somebody who mentioned US-India relations after the discovery of lithium in Kashmir, and trade talks being held around utilizing that in electric vehicles. I actually would hesitate to call Trump EV unfriendly. And the main reason for that is just because he's kind of well known for being really good friends right now with Elon Musk, and Elon Musk is an EV guy. So I actually would be surprised if we see really punitive US EV policy. I'd be much more concerned about trade policy around things like solar and wind, where that's an area of China's strength. But I think the US, particularly as it looks to China's rising strength in electric vehicles, I would certainly hope that a guy like Elon Musk would not want to create a situation that made it hard for the US to be involved in global EV supply chains. So that's what I would say about that.
I think that was a very wonderful summary of both the India-US relations and, US's stake and, relations from a climate change perspective. Thank you so much for that, Professor Kesley. I do have some, more questions for you, Danielle. There is some questions around someone's GPA. Pratham is asking that his GPA has been on the lower side, but he's done a couple of internships and, he wants to do an international relations program. What can he do in the next few months leading up to applying by the time you start in fall? What are some of the things that he could do? We can't be Harry Potter, go back in time and try and change our grades. What can he do in order to make up a strong profile while applying?
Sure, yeah. So as I mentioned earlier, we do a holistic application review process. So you mentioned that your GPA is on the lower side. That's okay. Don't think that necessarily makes a decision sway one way or the other. I said what our average GPA is, but of course that means that we get GPAs from students that are higher than that and GPAs that are lower than that. And so we are going to look at everything in your application. We'll look at not only your GPA, but everything in your transcript. So especially if we see a lower GPA than we would typically like to see, or than what our average is, we would look specifically at the classes that you've taken and how you did in different classes. We would look at kind of the trajectory of your undergraduate career and if your grades improved over time. We would see in your statement of purpose if you say anything about your GPA in terms of why it was the way it was. We'll look closely at your academic letter of recommendation. But in terms of what you can do kind of over the next month, since Ashrang said you can't go back in time at this point, the thing that you have the most control over in your application at this point in time is your statement of purpose. And so that's really what I recommend focusing on. That is your kind of spotlight area to connect all the dots for us. So what is it about your background, both your educational background, but also any professional experience that you have, any leadership experience, any personal experience that you have that has led you to this point to wanting to apply to a master's program in international affairs? What career path do you see yourself on? Why do you specifically think that the Elliott School is going to help you get to that career path and reach your career goals? And kind of tie all of those pieces together for us, why you would be a good fit for our school and why we want you into our school as a good fit for us as well. So that's really what I recommend focusing on. If you are kind of stumped on that statement of purpose and don't really know where to start, I recommend talking to a trusted friend or family member, someone that you really like to kind of share share things about yourself with, and just start talking about this. This is a career where you have a real passion for something. So start talking about that, and that can kind of help you formulate the pieces that you want to touch on in your statement of purpose.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that. I hope, Pratham, that answers your question. Also answers Shamit Sharma's question, which is weightage assigned to different criteria. There's not a exact weightage to different criteria. It's an overall holistic view that universities usually take. So thank you so much for also talking about that. This question is for either you, Danielle, or for you, Professor Kelsey, as well. There's some questions around what are some of the career services opportunities, or how does GW Elliott help students reach their career goals, be it working at the IMF, World Bank, or these wonderful relationships that GW has with these external parties and external companies. What are some of the services that are on offer for international students primarily?
Yeah, I can start there, and then Dr. Kelsey, feel free to fill in anything else. Our career services team at the Elliott School is absolutely fantastic. So you've got a great support team with you once you start at the Elliott School. Our career services team is within our Graduate Student Services Office. We call it GSS, and that houses academic advising, career coaching, and international experiential education, or study abroad, essentially. And so they are kind of a one-stop shop for you to get all of the kind of wraparound supports that you need, in addition to the support of your program director while you're enrolled. So what you'll actually do at the very beginning of your program is sit down with your academic advisor, with the consultation with your program director as well, and fill out what we call a comprehensive action plan. And that outlines not only the courses that you're going to take throughout your program based on your specific interests, but also some of the steps that you're going to take to reach your career goals. So you'll start having those conversations. You'll start thinking about what events you're going to go to, what internships you might want to have. You can set up one-on-one career coaching appointments. Our career services office offers a ton of different resources, whether it's that one-on-one coaching. They offer several workshops like resume and cover letter development. And then they also offer a ton of things like site visits around the DC area. They also do a career trek every year where for a week they take students to someplace, typically in the US, like, a hub for international affairs. So I think it was New York this past year. It's been New York many years. I think they went to Chicago one year. So lots of those opportunities, lots of information sessions of employers where they come to campus. I know the CIA has come to campus for information sessions so that students can kind of get a sense of what it's like to work there. During the site visits, you're meeting with, HR, but also with our alumni that work at those locations to kind of really give you a sense of what it's like to work there. So it's a lot of info. I'll actually drop a link into the chat also of our career services team and some of the things that they offer, but you will be in great hands with us when it comes to that career development here at the Elliott School.
Sure. Thank you so much for that, Danielle. Professor Kelsey, this question, yes, around career services, but with your experience of teaching international students, what are some of the qualities that you see more in these successful candidates, and how do they transition into good career moves? Do you have some examples in mind of some students who you taught and what they're doing right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that in terms of skills to do well at Elliott and skills to do well at the in the professional world, there's a lot of crossover. Because what I look for in a student is one that is sort of proactive, right? That is interested in the course material, not just because they think they have to check some boxes, but because it actually genuinely interests them, because they are thinking about how it applies to their careers. The great thing about teaching MA students is that most of our MA students have really specific ideas about what they want to be doing. Some of them certainly do come straight out of undergrad, but many of them have some level of work experience already and either know what they do want to do or at least what they don't want to do. And so, they often bring something a little special to the classroom in terms of just the experiences or interests they have sort of outside the classroom. And ironically, that is also what I recommend folks in terms of developing that professional career, which is to think about what you can do outside the classroom. I do think we have an absolutely fantastic career services, and I highly recommend them. But it's also a question of what can you do for yourself. And for me, that is the other big strength of our very specific location. Because what I tell students is get out there, go to events. You could attend anything from congressional hearings to, committee hearings to think tank events to World Bank or IMF events. And that's how you make those connections. You go to events, your face is seen, maybe you ask a question, maybe somebody will remember the second or third time you do that. So I send students a lot over to Resources for the Future, which is a energy and environmental and resource related think tank. It's quite near where we are up in the I'm blanking on the circle, but it's pretty near where we are. I say just start, they hold events multiple times a week. Just start showing up to some of those events that interest you, ask questions, meet people. Once you've identified somebody that you think would be good in terms of a professional connection and you find their work interesting, email them, ask them to have 15 minutes coffee with you right near where they work. Offer to treat them if you can. They'll probably say no, but it's nice to offer. And then just talk with them about their work. Everybody loves talking about their work. And so you don't have to do anything more hard than that. You don't have to go and make some sales pitch for yourself. You just have to be interested in what they're doing and how you could be involved in it.
Absolutely. Take the initiative because universities, do give you the platform to, go out and meet companies, try and connect with alumni, try and connect with professors and their network as well. But it's mostly about what you do, and you should be putting in that hard work as well. We are running out of time. It is actually 9 p.m. here in India and about 10:30 a.m. Back in DC. I would like to thank each and every one of you, the 220 of you that are still glued to your phones, your iPads, your tablets or your laptops. Thank you so much for taking out time. I'd also like to thank Danielle and Professor Kesley. What we will do is we will share the information of the contact email address. Any information you'd like to learn about GW Elliott, we will share all that information with you. So do watch out for an email from us tomorrow. Within 24 hours, you will hear from us on WhatsApp and on email. And the attendees also have application fee waivers. So if you are, looking to apply at GW School of GW Elliott School of International Affairs, pardon me, this should be certainly helpful. Once again, Danielle, Professor Kelsey, thank you so much for taking our time, and the 220 of you as well. It was a pleasure hosting you. Thank you, and have a nice rest of the day.
Thank you so much for being here so
attending.
late in your day.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye. Bye.